the owner of a local high-tech computer lab took it upon himself to investigate the stories. Using information from eyewitness accounts, Jim Delatoso reconstructed the unusual events of March 13th with computer animation.
I've been doing UFO research a long time, in fact over 20 years, and in that time most of the cases I've been able to identify as some natural phenomenon. In fact, I've even found some hoaxes. But the Phoenix lights were something very different. Hundreds and hundreds of witnesses, multiple videotapes that we could test, and then with all of the witness reports be able to do a recreation. The lights were first sighted at 8:16 p.m. when the first report went into the National UFO Reporting Center from a former police officer who spotted a very unusual formation of orbs near Paulden, Arizona, in the northwestern part of the state. Within just a few minutes, 50 miles away in Prescott, Arizona, hundreds of witnesses now reported a formation of lights.
After cutting an aerial path through the Prescott Valley, the craft moved on toward the heavily populated capital city of Phoenix and reportedly put on quite a show. According to witnesses, the enormous triangular-shaped object hovered over one of the city's major intersections for a full 5 minutes. It then moved into the airspace of the major international airport in Phoenix, where it was witnessed by professional air traffic controllers and pilots alike. And that brought up something else that was very odd about this object.
At Sky Harbor Airport, a commercial pilot was getting ready to take off when he radioed the tower and asked what this huge thing was over him. The flight controllers could see it, but they couldn't get it on radar.
Later, the strange lights made their way out of the Phoenix area and headed southeast toward Tucson.
One family reported seeing the lights as they drove from Tucson into Phoenix. The object above them was so large that it took a full 2 minutes for them to drive underneath, and that was at a freeway speed of between 65 and 75 miles per hour.
I personally interviewed over 300 witnesses. Now, these witnesses are professional, reliable people, doctors, lawyers, and ordinary citizens. Not the kind of people looking for 15 minutes of fame, but people who wanted to know what this was. So first I find out what it isn't, airplane lights, hail-bop, and then try to determine if it's an advanced military aircraft project or possibly something not from this world.
What was it that hundreds of reputable, professional, and thoroughly sober people saw in the dark desert skies over Phoenix? In spite of being scoffed at by city officials, Councilwoman Frances Barwood continued her investigation. But would perseverance lead her to the truth or land her in the middle of a government cover-up?
Being stonewalled by the city council only made me more curious, and I decided to dig deeper. Apparently, the city manager's office did respond with a memo dated May 16, 1997, but I didn't receive it until August of 97. The memo said, a check of police department reports show that there were fewer than 5 citizen calls about these lights. Since the city does not have resources or expertise to investigate the source of lights, such as those that were reported, we depend on the United States Air Force to investigate all such matters. I knew I was being lied to when I was shown a video of a TV interview with the spokesperson for the Phoenix Police Department, where they said they were overwhelmed with phone calls at the police department about the lights. I knew I had to find out what was really going on.
Barwood contacted Arizona Senator John McCain and asked him to give the matter some official notice. But once again, she got the cold shoulder.
Up until then, Senator McCain and I had a pretty good relationship, but I think his people got a little upset when I kept pushing for action. He finally did send a letter to the National Archives, where he said a constituent saw something in the sky. There was no mention that I was an elected official, that there were hundreds of witnesses, and no call for action. I was stunned.
Why did government officials at every level refuse to get involved in an investigation of the Phoenix lights? Could it be that the mysterious lights were extraterrestrial in origin? Or are there eyewitness statements that support a more earthly conclusion? From that day to this, the official reaction to hundreds of eyewitness accounts has been silence, ridicule, or good old-fashioned government stonewalling. Nevertheless, we'll attempt to illuminate the mystery behind this astonishing story.
There were witnesses who did see planes in the sky over Phoenix on March 13th, 1997. Maybe military, maybe not. In fact, there was one witness who said that he did see planes through his telescope. I don't doubt that people saw planes. They did see planes, probably the ones that were sent out from Luke Air Force Base to investigate the phenomena.
We talked to witnesses who were close on the ground by the runway, who saw these jets scrambling, taking off, afterburners going, pursuing the orbs that were up above the Air Force Base.
Is that the answer? Can the Phoenix lights be attributed to a group of military aircraft, possibly F-15s or F-16s, from the nearby Luke Air Force Base?
We have a report that the U.S. military was placed on a defense condition alert that night, a DEFCON 3, in response possibly to the events over Phoenix.
Based on the testimony of a key eyewitness, military jets were in the air that night. But some investigators say it wasn't just for a routine training mission. They were, in fact, out to intercept a huge UFO.
Here at the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, we took dozens of calls that night about the strange lights over Phoenix. One of the later reports came from a gentleman who was a truck driver hauling a load of freight in the vicinity of Luke Air Force Base. The truck driver watched the lights for 20 minutes as he made his way towards the outskirts of Phoenix. When he stopped to make his drop-off, he could clearly see two orbs of light shaped like hot air balloons. They were only a couple of miles away from him near the runway at Luke Air Force Base. At that moment, he saw three jets take off on full afterburner. As they passed directly overhead, they banked sharply and appeared to fly directly towards one of the two objects in the night sky above Phoenix.
The truck driver's report was verified by several witnesses. One woman that I spoke to, who lives right near the Air Force Base, said she saw 3 or 4 jets being scrambled that night, and she had never seen that before. Another witness saw a giant triangular-shaped object hovering near a small commuter airport in northwest Phoenix. He, too, saw military jets approaching the unidentified object. One of the jets flew up under the craft and had to veer away at the last moment to avoid a mid-air collision.
One of the more dramatic calls we took that night was from a gentleman who identified himself as an airman at Luke Air Force Base who had actually been on the tarmac that night. He reported that one of the two pilots had been so badly shaken by the intercept that he had to be helped from his cockpit.
Do these eyewitness accounts prove that there was UFO activity over Phoenix on the night of March 13th, 1997? We should point out that the military denies these reports. Officials at Luke Air Force Base have denied sending out any jets that night or even receiving calls about the mysterious lights. And yet phone records prove that the base was flooded with reports from concerned citizens. Is the military trying to hide the truth about the Phoenix lights? Or is it merely attempting to diffuse a situation that can be easily explained? Could something as benign as flares dropped from military aircraft account for the strange lights? Or is this yet another smokescreen? And if the whole thing can be so easily explained, why not just explain it? Obviously, there's more here than meets the eye. And we'll see if we can discover what that is. On March 13th, 1997, a flurry of UFO activity was reported in 3 western states, with the most significant sightings concentrated in and around the Phoenix, Arizona area. Despite the persistence of investigators, in the days following these strange events, personnel at Luke Air Force Base denied that there was any military aircraft in the area that night. But their story would soon change.
On the evening of March 13th, 1997, about 10 o'clock, I was done watching TV and I went outside and I noticed an orange light on the Estrella Mountains further east than I've ever seen it before. I went inside the house, got my video camera, went out and I started to photograph the light. As I was doing so, it disappeared and it reappeared lower to the right. I trained my camera on that light, and as I was doing so, a light further to the right appeared, and from that light, a number of lights started to go on that formed an arc.
Several months after the Phoenix Lights event, the military came up with its own explanation for what had happened. They suddenly discovered that they had had a training flight in the air that night over the Barry Goldwater Gunnery Range, located some 40 miles to the southwest of Phoenix. The military asserted that sometime during the evening of March 13th, a group of A-10 aircraft had taken off from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson and headed towards Phoenix. As part of this exercise, military flares were launched by the aircraft. The flares are attached to parachutes and they burn very brightly. They are held aloft by the prevailing winds and by the parachutes. According to the military, these flares can be seen from up to 150 miles away. So what they want us to believe is that the flares were the cause of these unusual lights and not any kind of alien craft.
Over the years, I have seen flares dropped and I know what they look like. They're smaller, they're dimmer, and they drift. What I photographed were bright orange lights that held a position for 2.5 minutes and did not move.
At first glance, the military's explanation seemed plausible. So, members of the local media used amateur video taken on that night to prove the theory.
This particular video was shot in the northern part of Phoenix, looking south towards the Estrella Mountains. One of the key issues on the 10 o'clock sighting was the location of the lights. Because they were videotaped from multiple locations, we could take all those videotapes and triangulate it in a computer system and position it on a 3D topographical map. And clearly, to us, the lights are in front of the Estrella mountain range and lower than even the top of the mountains, which means that these can't be flares behind the mountain range 50 miles away.
Could it be that the military's explanation for the Phoenix lights may actually raise more questions than it answers? What was the reason for dropping flares in the first place? Was it just a training exercise? Or was the military trying to shed some light on the unidentified objects that had been buzzing around Phoenix?
The military probably did the right thing in explaining it the way that they did, because I don't think that the military truly understands what happened.
Does the government have something to hide? Recent revelations about a new technology being developed by the U.S. military may explain their involvement in the Phoenix lights. A number of eyewitnesses to the lights reported that the objects they saw were able to disappear in an instant, especially when they were approached by military jets. But were the jets actually pursuing the UFOs? Or was this some type of test for a new, top-secret government technology?
Some of the witnesses that were very close to the object reported that when they looked up at it, they could see in between the lights a structured object, but that they could also see the stars, kind of like looking through water. Well, the idea of daytime stealth, invisibility, has been being researched by Lockheed Martin, and they've come up with something really interesting called an electrochromic polymer. What does that mean? That means that the aircraft has a skin on it that is like little cameras that look out and see the sky and the stars and then project that onto the bottom of the skin, so that when you look up, you would see the stars as if you were looking right through it.
Was the U.S. military testing a new top-secret aircraft on the night of March 13, 1997? If so, daylight stealth technology would help explain how the object was able to disappear so easily, but it doesn't explain everything.
When my husband Tim and I first saw the lights, we thought it was a squadron of helicopters flying in formation. Then we noticed how rigid the lights really were. They seemed to be floating in the sky, but then we realized they were moving, and they were coming directly at us. We were talking about it. As we watched the lights approach, we said how difficult it would be to fly 5 separate objects in such a perfect pattern. As they got closer, we began to wonder if this was one huge object with 5 large lights, but I thought, that can't be. It was less than a mile away, and there was no sound. How could an object that huge fly without making any noise? When it was about a half mile away, we began to see the outline of what was an enormous craft. As it got closer, we could clearly see its dark shape as it moved across the background of the stars. It reminded me of a carpenter's square set at 60 degrees because the outline of it was so perfectly balanced with sharp edges, and the size of this thing was just mind-boggling. Its wingspan looked about 2 city blocks long, and it was so close that you couldn't see the whole thing at once. I had to turn my head to take it all in. As the object moved overhead towards Phoenix, it was heading in a straight line like a train on a rail. And my husband said to me, he said, "Whoever has this kind of technology has got to be in cahoots with God."
Will we ever know the truth about what happened on that spring night? The unidentified lights may be gone, but they are not forgotten. Amateur video provides us with tantalizing proof that something occupied the Arizona skies that night. But one key piece of evidence is missing: a close-up of the huge V-shaped craft. Does such footage exist? And if so, where is it? Could it be that the mysterious Phoenix lights actually belong to a top-secret government aircraft? We may never know the answers to these questions, but one thing seems certain: the government is involved in some way, and it may have inadvertently provided us with a clue as to what that involvement is. Oh, by the way, remember the Maryland Air National Guard's training exercise on the night of March 13th? It was nicknamed Operation Snowbird. In military jargon, snowbird is a code word for diversion.